Hello, everyone. Welcome to my podcast, Judy Howard is Making It Happen. This episode is titled, It Has Finally Come to This, Becoming a Churchgoer. Recently, I decided to take extreme measures and began attending a church. It had finally come to this. I would expose myself to the churchgoers even though I had made a vow years ago never to become a member of a church. I had sworn that organized religion was never going to be a part of my normal. Since I was a teenager, I have nursed a very strong dislike for religious people. The more pious a person, the more I disliked them, and the more judgmental I became. The root of my anger sprouted up in 1964 when I turned 16 and found myself pregnant. After dropping out of school, having my baby, and then trying to return and graduate, only then did I discover how cruel people could be. The school administrators were the kind of people who hide behind their acclaims of love and forgiveness while they refused me permission to return. Because I had been pregnant, married, and now divorced, and a single mom. I was no longer a proper girl. But I was lucky. My mother had been raised Catholic, and my father had been raised Mormon. And in 1929, when they married, they had suffered their own kind of religious oppression as a result of their interfaith marriage. So, when the school refused to allow me to return, my father came to my rescue. Like a papa bear, he stormed into the principal's office and demanded I be allowed to return. I'd only seen my father's quiet anger once, and even as innocent as I was then, I knew he was not someone that you'd want to cross. So they allowed me to come back, but with restrictions. I had to sit in the back of the class and not socialize with any of the other students. If a social activity occurred, I was to wait in the principal's office until it was over. I often wondered if my father knew of those restrictions. And no one had told me I was a girl of low moral character. They didn't have to. They treated me like one. A lot of life has gone on past those high school days. And although the decision my offended heart made on behalf of me back then, it was not a conscious one, but it swore never to allow any pious hypocrites to be my friends. So over the years, I added others to my list besides those people at the school administrators. People I didn't even know. Every Jesus fanatic I met, and everyone who wanted to pray for me because I decided they wanted to pray for me because they thought I wasn't good enough. My harsh, judgmental attitude applied to pretty much anyone who seemed a bit too uppity, too educated, or just too perfect. And so, Judy Howard's group of unforgiven grew larger and larger. So why now have I made this crazy decision to expose myself to the church's setting where every Sunday, Judy's unforgiven gathered? I had developed a yearning to be a part of a community. So I recently moved in from the hustle and bustle of Southern California and settled down in the Southern Oregon coast. And as I met the locals at the grocery stores and on the beach and the hiking trails, I began to make many friends. I met more folks at the farmers market where, as a vendor, I sold my books. Everybody I encountered was extremely nice and always asking me if I needed anything, if I needed help with something as I settled into my new home. I had visited many small towns across the country during my travels, and it didn't surprise me that most everyone was a member of one of the many churches in town, because it was the same where I moved here in Brookings. I became best friends with 3 of these locals, and as the universe has a way of arranging things, 2 were Jesus lovers, and 1 was a Jesus fanatic. Was that by chance? I don't think so. Kindness is a prejudice killer. Soon I find myself conflicted. I began to question the validity of my prejudices about the churchgoers. I wanted to cling to my strong beliefs that I had coveted for so long, because who doesn't hate pious hypocrites? That's what I always thought. My opinions were the root of an angry discontent that I carried everywhere I went. I had begun to grow uncomfortable with them, though. But because these people were kind, I began to find it more and more difficult to justify my resentments. They were interfering with the quality of my life. My attitude had become unacceptable to me, let alone the other people. I could no longer ignore how I had become who I'd become. I was as self-righteous and hypocritical as the people I hated. I couldn't find any way around it. I had to face the lies I'd been telling myself. This is why, as distasteful as it seemed, I decided to immerse myself into a church environment. I decided to deal with the business of this standing and sitting and standing and sitting again and again alongside people who are praising the Lord by waving their hands in the air with what seemed like to me like pained expressions on their faces. My decision also meant I would have to listen to all those God bless yous. I would have to tolerate the prayers they prayed for everything in God's creation, it seemed, that they feared might go wrong someday. And the worst part of the experiment was the part that I dreaded the most, the part that annoyed and even frightened me the most: the language. I wanted to cover my ears to shield myself from the words they sprinkled all through their dialogue like icing on a cake. The language went against everything I believed. No, it wasn't language like fire and brimstone stuff. That dialogue had been abandoned years ago when they finally admitted it was not only not working, it was also unkind. But the institutions still cling to their negative dialogue. Words like sin, evil, the devil, and Satan. And every time I hear them, I shudder. Maybe do they believe because without guilt, they think nobody would come to their church? I don't know. So surely I must be crazy making this decision. How had it come to this? And yet, I couldn't see any other way. I had to meet my prejudices head on. My first visit to church was on Easter Sunday. That was like opening a can of worms, because here's the rub. I had been born on Easter Sunday. I disagreed with much of the rhetoric surrounding Easter. I stood and I sat and I stood and I sat again, trying my best to be tolerant. In my mind, I stood on the sidelines, all the while looking over at the others and judging the believers that were praising the Lord with what they called a glorious day. The next Sunday played out pretty much like the first week, but shorter, because without the barbaric image of everyone munching on Jesus' flesh and drinking his blood, it seemed to go a little faster. The only thing that didn't raise the hair on the back of my neck at this church was the meet and greet portion of the service. Because that was the entire point of my experiment. I wanted to become a part of this church community. As I stepped out into the aisle and smiled, they too smiled and a good morning, but they didn't always introduce themselves. I ignored their slight and introduced myself, and then I asked their names. The most enjoyable moments were the church members who were friends and acquaintances of mine whom I'd met elsewhere. They sought me out and welcomed me. That was nice. Several weeks passed. I listened to the sermons. I even took notes. But I cringed when any one of those words that I had on my banned list were mentioned. Words, again, like sin, Satan, evil, the devil. I endured it quietly. In my mind, I replaced sin for missing the mark, because I had heard somewhere that was the true meaning of the definition back then anyway. And the terms Satan and the devil, the so-called bad spirits whom churchgoers assign the responsibility for all the wrongdoing in the world, I switched out those words in exchange for words like obsessions and addictions, because that's really what gets us in trouble. Months passed. The tension in my stomach began to ease a little bit. I found myself looking forward to seeing everyone. And when I missed a Sunday, I was flattered when someone noticed. I felt myself softening. So if they waved their hands in the air while singing the hymns and shouted out loud, "Praise Jesus," I let them be. I began to accept that my way did not have to be their way. And as I did, the normal I had been clinging to so tightly shifted. I found a more powerful version of myself, a version whom God, I believe, intends for me to be. Because, believe me, the judging and the lying to myself and others was not the normal I wanted for my life, and I'm sure he didn't either. My attitude had been deadly, destructive, and a very bad habit. So what have I learned on this self-imposed journey of mine? We are not always who we think we are. And the only way to discover the truths about who we really are, our authenticity, it is to step out of our comfort zone, go out the front door, where the power of a new normal is waiting. Your entire life will change when you realize that stress and anxiety feed on idleness. Someone said the answers you are seeking are found in the simple actions you avoid. I know that was the way with me with the church people. As time passed, my anger turned into tolerance and acceptance. I no longer had to suffer its debilitating effects that led to no good. I was tired of being a victim. My new normal offered a better way, one of unconditional love and forgiveness. Thank you for listening. I love you all. And because it has come to this, I even love you churchgoers. I am Judy Howard, and I am making it happen. Thank you for listening.